In late June of 2021, a heat wave settled over the Pacific Northwest, a corner of America famous for gray skies, cool drizzle, and mild summers. Portland, Oregon, reached 116 degrees Fahrenheit. Seattle hit 108. Just across the Canadian border, the village of Lytton recorded 121 degrees, a temperature never before seen anywhere in Canada, and the very next day. Lytton burned to the ground in a wildfire. But the most staggering number from that week was not a temperature at all. It was the death toll. Across the region, hundreds of people died, by some estimates, well over 1,000. And they died not because the heat was hotter than a desert summer, but because it arrived in a place that was utterly unprepared for it. A place where almost no one owned an air conditioner and no one knew what to do. That is the single most important thing to understand about extreme heat, and it is the reason this video exists. Heat is not equally dangerous everywhere. It is most lethal precisely where it is least expected. And right now, in the summer of 2026, America's heat wave is doing exactly that. Expanding out of the deserts in the deep south, where people are built for it, and pushing north into states that are not. This is the story of that expansion, where the heat is going, why it is going there, and why the places it is reaching are, paradoxically, in more danger than the places that are used to being this hot. Let me start with what is actually happening this week, and I'll be precise, because the geography matters enormously here. As of late July 2026, a vast heat dome is expanding across the central United States. Dangerous, triple-digit heat that has been baking the desert southwest and the Gulf Coast is spreading outward and, most notably, northward, pushing temperatures above 100 degrees across the Great Plains all the way up to North Dakota, and reaching into the upper Midwest and up into south-central Canada. Something like 70 million Americans are under heat alerts. And as with every dangerous heat event, the nights are a huge part of the threat. Overnight temperatures are not expected to fall far enough for people to recover. So the heat stress just accumulates, day after day, with the humidity making it feel even worse. Two forces are driving this particular event, according to forecasters. The first is long-term drought across much of the western plains. Parched ground has no moisture to evaporate, and evaporation is what would normally take the edge off the heat, so bone-dry land simply heats up faster and hotter, like an empty pan left on a burner. The second is a fast-emerging El Niño in the Pacific, which this summer has been reinforcing persistent high pressure over the Northwest, the Great Basin, and the Northern Rockies, helping to build and anchor the very ridge that is now baking the interior. Denver was already flirting with triple digits late last week. The zoo there was filling pools for the elephants, and the leading edge of the heat is pushing into territory that rarely sees it, the northern Great Plains and the Canadian prairies, where a stretch of 100-degree days is a genuinely unusual and dangerous event. Now here is the crucial and slightly counterintuitive part, and I want to be completely honest about it, because it is the key to the whole story. The two regions that Americans most associate with not expecting heat, the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast, are actually being spared this particular round. The forecast keeps them mild, even cool, with highs in some places only in the 60s and 70s. So this is not the heat marching to Seattle or Boston this week. The expansion is happening in a different direction, north, into the interior, into the northern plains and the upper Midwest, into the Dakotas and Minnesota, and up into Canada. These are places that certainly get hot summers, but that do not routinely endure this kind of sustained, punishing, triple-digit heat, and that, like the Pacific Northwest in 2021, are less equipped for it than the desert cities to their south. The heat is not going where people expect heat. It is going somewhere new. So why is it going there, and why are the coasts being left alone? The answer is a beautiful and slightly ominous pattern in the atmosphere that meteorologists call an omega block, and it is worth understanding, because it explains everything about the shape of this heat wave. Picture the jet stream, the river of fast-moving air high in the atmosphere that steers our weather, not as a straight line, but as a big, exaggerated wave. In an omega block, the jet stream buckles into a shape that looks like the capital Greek letter omega. It juts far to the north in the middle, forming a giant upward bulge with dips, or troughs, hanging down on either side. That big northward bulge in the middle is a massive dome of high pressure, and high pressure in summer means sinking air clear skies, and relentless heat. It is parked, right now, over the western and central United States, which is why the middle of the country is baking, with the heat able to bulge unusually far north into the plains in Canada. And the two troughs on either side, over the east coast and the west coast, are doing the opposite. They are channeling cooler air and moisture, which is why the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest are getting mild temperatures and even showers while the interior roasts. The omega shape is the whole explanation. It bakes the middle and shields the edges. And critically, an omega block is a stubborn, slow-moving pattern. It can lock in place for a week or more, which is exactly why this heat is forecast to be so long-lasting. But the pattern is just the weather, the delivery mechanism. The reason this matters, the reason an expanding heat wave is genuinely dangerous news rather than just an uncomfortable one, comes down to a single idea: preparedness. And this is the heart of everything. When extreme heat hits a place that is built for it, it is dangerous but survivable. Take Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix routinely sees temperatures well above 110 degrees, and yet it does not suffer mass casualties every summer, because the entire city is engineered around heat. Nearly every home, office, car, and store has powerful air conditioning. The power grid is built to handle the enormous electricity demand of everyone running that air conditioning at once. There are established cooling centers, public awareness campaigns, and emergency plans. And the people themselves are acclimatized. Their bodies have physically adapted to the heat over years of exposure. And they know instinctively to hydrate, to stay inside during peak hours, to check on elderly neighbors. Phoenix has in effect spent decades building an entire civilization designed to survive extreme heat. Now take that same heat, or even a lesser version of it, and drop it on a place that has none of those things. That is where people die. And there are 5 specific reasons why. 5 ways that an unprepared place turns heat into a killer. The first and biggest is air conditioning, or the lack of it. In historically cool regions, air conditioning has always been seen as an unnecessary luxury. Why install and run an expensive ACT system for the 2 or 3 warm weeks a year you used to get? So in places like the Pacific Northwest and in much of the northern tier of the country, a huge fraction of homes simply do not have air conditioning at all. When a heat dome arrives, those homes have no way to cool down, and the people inside have nowhere to escape the heat. The second reason makes the first one worse. The homes themselves are built backwards for heat. A house in a cool climate is designed to trap and hold warmth, thick insulation, small windows, tight construction, dark heat absorbing roofs, sometimes no cross ventilation at all. Those are wonderful features in a cold winter, but in a heat wave, that same house becomes an oven. It soaks up the day's heat and holds it so that the inside of the home can actually be hotter than the air outside. And it stays dangerously hot deep into the night, exactly when the body most needs to cool down and recover. People have died indoors, in their own living rooms, in homes that had become heat traps. The third reason is the human body itself. Acclimatization to heat is real and physical. Given a couple of weeks of exposure, a body adapts, learning to sweat sooner and more efficiently, and to better regulate its core temperature. People who live with heat are acclimatized. People in cool climates are not. When a sudden heat wave hits them, their bodies are simply not prepared to cope, and they are far more vulnerable to heat stroke at temperatures that an acclimatized person would shrug off. The fourth reason is behavioral, and it is quietly one of the most dangerous. People who are not used to extreme heat do not recognize the danger. They do not take it seriously. They keep gardening, keep exercising, keep working outside, keep the windows shut, keep going about their day. Because in their experience, a hot day is just a hot day, an inconvenience, not a threat. That lack of respect for the heat, born of inexperience, is precisely what gets people killed, because heat stroke can come on fast and can be fatal before its victim even fully understands what is happening. And the fifth reason is the infrastructure around them. An unprepared region does not just have unprepared homes, it has unprepared systems. The power grid was never designed for a sudden, massive spike in electricity demand, as everyone who does have air conditioning cranks it to maximum, which can trigger blackouts. And a blackout during a heat wave is a genuine catastrophe, cutting the cooling and refrigeration that people depend on to survive. There are few cooling centers because the region never needed them. Hospitals and emergency services are not staffed or equipped for a wave of heat-related illness. The whole society is caught flat-footed. Put those five together: no air conditioning, homes that trap heat, unacclimatized bodies, people who don't respect the danger, and infrastructure that isn't ready, and you have the recipe for a mass casualty event. Of all those factors, the one that keeps emergency planners up at night is the power grid, because it carries the potential for the single worst outcome: a blackout during a heat wave. Consider the grim logic of it. As a heat wave intensifies, electricity demand spikes to record levels because everyone who has air conditioning runs it as hard as they can, all at once. That surging demand strains the grid at the exact moment the heat is also degrading the grid's own equipment. Transformers and power lines run less efficiently and can fail when they themselves overheat. If the system is pushed past its limit, it can fail and the power goes out. And a blackout in the middle of a severe heat wave is a nightmare scenario, because it instantly removes the one thing keeping people alive: their air conditioning. Suddenly, even the households that were prepared, that did have AC and were sheltering safely, are plunged into the same lethal heat as everyone else, and now with no refrigeration for food or medicine, no way to charge a phone to call for help, and often no working water. A prolonged blackout during extreme heat in a densely populated area is one of the genuinely catastrophic scenarios that keeps disaster experts awake, because it could kill on a scale that dwarfs even the worst heat events we have seen so far. The grid is the thin thread that the whole modern defense against heat hangs from, and heat is exactly the thing most likely to snap it. Which brings us back to where we started, to the definitive example of what happens when heat reaches a place that is not expecting it: the Pacific Northwest, in the summer of 2021. It is worth sitting with that event in detail, because it is the clearest warning we have. That heat dome shattered records that were not supposed to be breakable in that part of the world. Portland, a city where summer highs are typically in the pleasant 70s and 80s, reached 116 degrees. Seattle, famous for its cool gray weather, hit 108. And the temperatures were lethal precisely because of everything I just described. At the time, the Seattle metro area had one of the lowest rates of home air conditioning of any major city in the United States. A huge share of homes had none at all because they had simply never needed it. People had no way to cool down, no acclimatization, no plan, and no sense that a heat wave could actually kill them. And it killed them in staggering numbers. Across Oregon, Washington, and neighboring British Columbia, the death toll ran into the hundreds. British Columbia alone recorded around 600 heat-related deaths, and broader estimates of the excess deaths across the whole region reach well over 1,000. It was one of the deadliest weather events in the modern history of that region, and it happened not in a desert, but in one of the mildest, greenest, most temperate corners of the continent. The heat did not have to be the hottest on Earth. It only had to arrive somewhere that had never learned to survive it. The fate of Lytton, that small Canadian village, is the whole story compressed into a single place. On June 29, 2021, Lytton set the all-time temperature record for all of Canada, 121 degrees Fahrenheit, a reading you would expect in the Sahara, not in British Columbia. It was a number so far beyond anything in the region's experience that it barely seemed real. And then, the very next day, before anyone could even absorb what had happened, a wildfire ignited in the tender dry heat and swept through the village so fast that residents fled with only minutes to spare, leaving most of the town to burn to the ground. The town went from setting a national heat record to ceasing to exist, essentially overnight. It is difficult to imagine a starker illustration of what it means for extreme heat to arrive somewhere utterly unprepared for it. The record and the catastrophe, back to back, in 48 hours. And this is not only an American story. The same lesson is being written, tragically, around the world. Look at Europe. Europe is a wealthy, developed, temperate continent, and for exactly that reason. Air conditioning there has always been rare. Most homes, and even many businesses, simply do not have it. And so, when the increasingly frequent and intense heat waves roll across Europe, they kill, on a scale that shocks people. A severe heat wave in Europe this past June was blamed for thousands of excess deaths, including several thousand in France alone. Europe, like the Pacific Northwest, is a case study in what happens when brutal heat meets a society that was built in every brick and every habit for a cooler world. So step back, and you can see the real and much larger story hiding inside a routine-sounding forecast about an expanding heat wave. The genuine danger is not simply that it is hot in the places that are always hot. It is that the entire frontier of dangerous heat is expanding, pushing north into higher latitudes, into historically cool and temperate regions, reaching places that have never had to deal with it and are not built for it. This week, it is the northern plains and the upper Midwest and Canada. In 2021, it was the Pacific Northwest. In recent summers, it has been Europe, and Britain, and even the Arctic. The heat is colonizing new territory, and the places on that advancing frontier are the ones in the most danger, because danger, when it comes to heat, is not really about the temperature. It is about the gap between the heat that arrives and the preparation that is there to meet it. And on the expanding edge of the heat, that gap is at its widest. There is something almost disorienting about this, because it quietly redraws the mental map most of us carry around. For generations, Americans have known where the hot places are, the desert Southwest, the deep South Texas, and where the cool places are, the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Tier, New England. We chose where to live, how to build our homes, and whether to buy air conditioning based on that map. But the map is now out of date, and it is falling further out of date every year. The heat is spilling across the old lines. A summer that puts North Dakota and the Canadian prairies under a stretch of 100-degree days, or that pushes 116 degrees onto Portland, is a summer that has erased the boundary people assumed was permanent. And because our homes and our habits and our infrastructure were all built around the old map, we are, collectively, prepared for a climate that is quietly ceasing to exist. That mismatch between the world our buildings were designed for and the world that is actually arriving is, in a sentence, the entire danger. It is why the expansion of a heat wave into new territory is not a footnote in a forecast. It is the story. Let me end, as always, with honesty and balance. This week's heat, real and dangerous as it is not the apocalypse. Heat waves are a normal part of summer. The northern plains have been hot before, and this particular dome will break when the pattern shifts, as it always eventually does. The coasts, as I said plainly, are being spared this round entirely. And the good news is that unpreparedness is fixable. It is, in fact, the most fixable part of the whole climate problem. Air conditioning is spreading rapidly through historically cool regions, precisely because of events like the 2021 Pacific Northwest disaster. Cities are building cooling centers, hardening their power grids, and running the public awareness campaigns that genuinely save lives. A place can learn to survive heat, and many are learning fast. The deaths are not inevitable, but the trend underneath is real and it is not going away, and it is worth stating plainly one last time. As the climate warms, dangerous heat is reaching into more and more places that were never designed to handle it, and the deadliest heat wave is not the one that hits the desert, but the one that hits somewhere new, somewhere unready, somewhere that still thinks of a hot day as nothing more than a good excuse to go outside. So, as of this week, late in July of 2026, the Great Dome of Heat sits over the middle of the country, bulging north across the plains, into the Dakotas and up into Canada, into places that do not often see it and are not fully ready for it, while the coasts, for now, stay cool on the far sides of the Omega. 70 million people are being told to stay in, drink water, and check on the people around them. That heat will pass. But it is a rehearsal and a warning for the summers still coming, because the single clearest lesson that extreme heat has taught us, written in the death tolls from Portland to British Columbia to Paris, is this: the heat does its worst not where it is strongest, but where it is least expected. And in a warming world, the list of places that are not expecting it is getting shorter every single year.